Have you ever stopped to think about how fear has become a constant in our lives? From the small worries of everyday life to the great fears that plague humanity, we live in a state of almost permanent alert. But why? What changed in our society to make fear so prevalent? In this video, we'll explore the roots of this phenomenon and how it impacts our lives in ways you might not even imagine. We'll talk about the existential insecurity that pervades our era, how globalization has amplified our fears, and the strategies we've developed to cope with them. Get ready for a fascinating journey through the world of contemporary fears. We'll uncover how the fear of death, the perception of evil, and even global terror shape our daily reality. And don't worry, we're not here to scare anyone, but rather to better understand the world we live in. Throughout this video, you'll discover surprising insights into modern society and maybe find new perspectives to deal with your own fears. If this proposal piques your curiosity, be sure to watch until the end. And if you're enjoying the content, how about leaving a like? It really helps us reach more people interested in this kind of reflection. So, are you ready to face your fears head on? Let's go, because knowledge is the best weapon against fear. And who knows, by the end of this video, you might feel more prepared to face the challenges of this complex and sometimes frightening world. Stay with us, because the discussion is about to get even more interesting. Now that we understand the big picture, let's delve into the first topic of our video, the origin of fear in modern society. This subject is crucial for understanding how we got to where we are today. Fear is certainly not a modern invention. Our ancestors had their fears too, but something has drastically changed in how we experience and deal with fear today. Let's start by exploring the existential insecurity that permeates our era. In the past, life followed a relatively predictable path. People were born, grew up, found stable jobs, got married, had children, and so on. There was a certain order and predictability to events. Now, think about life today. How many of us are absolutely sure about what we will be doing 5 years from now? Reality has become much more fluid and uncertain. This constant uncertainty fuels our fears in various ways. There's the fear of losing our jobs, of falling behind in a rapidly changing world, of not being good enough to face emerging challenges. And this is where globalization comes into play, amplifying all these fears. Globalization acts as an amplifier for our fears. With the advent of the internet and social media, we have instant access to information about disasters, crises, and threats from anywhere in the world. More than that, we start to feel that these problems, even if geographically distant, could directly affect us. An economic crisis in one country can have global repercussions, affecting jobs and economies worldwide. A public health issue on one continent can quickly spread and alter routines elsewhere. Moreover, globalization has brought profound changes in how we relate to work and financial security. The concept of a job for life has almost disappeared. Today, flexibility is valued, which might sound positive until we realize that flexible often means unstable. Careers have become more dynamic but also more uncertain. Personal relationships have also been affected by these changes. With so many options and possible connections, paradoxically, many people feel lonelier than ever. Social media gives us the illusion of being constantly connected, but many of these connections lack depth and real meaning. This whole scenario creates an environment conducive to the growth and spread of fear. It's as if we're in a constant state of alert, always anticipating the next crisis or change that could significantly alter our lives. However, it's important to note that this same uncertainty that scares us also opens doors to new possibilities. The central question is, how can we navigate this sea of uncertainties without letting fear dominate us? Understanding the origin of our fears is a crucial step to dealing with them more healthily. By understanding the mechanisms behind our fears, we can develop more effective strategies to face them. It's interesting to see how fear manifests differently in each individual and in each society. While some primarily fear for their physical safety, others are more concerned with financial stability or the future of the planet. These fears are not isolated but interconnected, forming a complex web of anxieties that characterizes our era. The speed of technological changes also significantly contributes to this scenario of uncertainties. The rapid evolution of artificial intelligence, for example, generates both excitement and apprehension. Many people wonder if their skills will remain relevant in the near future or if they will be replaced by machines. Another important aspect is how fear can be manipulated and amplified by different social actors. Media, politicians, and even companies can, intentionally or not, fuel certain fears to achieve their goals. This makes developing critical thinking and a deeper understanding of fear mechanisms even more crucial. The way we deal with fear has also changed over time. If in the past communities came together to face common threats, today we often seek individual solutions for problems that are actually collective. This can lead to even greater isolation and a vicious cycle of fear and anxiety. Understanding the origin of fear in modern society is not just an academic exercise. It is a valuable tool to empower us to live more fully and less constrained by our fears. By recognizing the factors that fuel our fears, we can begin to question their validity and seek more constructive ways of dealing with life's uncertainties. In the next topic, we will address a theme that is at the root of many of our fears, the fear of death. This discussion promises to be enlightening and will help us better understand how this fundamental fear influences various aspects of our lives and society as a whole. Now that we've explored the origins of fear in our modern society, let's dive into a topic that lies at the heart of many of our anxieties, the fear of death. This is a subject many prefer to avoid, but understanding it is crucial for us to better comprehend our fears and how they shape our lives. Death is undoubtedly the only certainty we have in life. However, our relationship with it is deeply complex and often contradictory. In contemporary society, we observe a curious duality. On one hand, death seems more present than ever, with constant news about tragedies and mortality statistics. On the other hand, there is a continuous effort to keep it out of our daily consciousness. Historically, different cultures have developed various ways of dealing with mortality. Rituals, religious beliefs, and philosophies have served as strategies to make sense of life's finiteness. However, with the advancement of science and technology, our relationship with death has significantly transformed. One modern strategy for dealing with the fear of death is the relentless pursuit of longevity and even immortality. Medical advancements, miracle diets, intense physical exercise, all can be seen, in part, as attempts to delay the inevitable. This obsession with extending life reflects a deep fear of the end and a difficulty in accepting our finite nature. Paradoxically, while we try to prolong life at all costs, we also see a certain banalization of death in contemporary culture. Movies, games, and news constantly expose us to images of death, but often in a way disconnected from its real emotional impact. This excessive exposure can lead to desensitization, where death becomes something distant and unreal until we are confronted with it in our personal lives. Another interesting aspect is how the fear of death influences our daily decisions and behaviors. Many of our actions, from choosing a career to how we relate to others, can be seen as attempts to create a legacy, to leave a mark that survives our physical existence. This desire for transcendence is a direct response to our fear of mortality. Consumer society also feeds on this fear. The implicit promise in many products and services is of a longer, healthier, or more meaningful life. We purchase insurance, invest in health plans, acquire anti-aging products, all in the hope of protecting ourselves against the inevitability of death. However, it is important to note that not all cultures view death the same way. In some societies, death is seen as a natural and even celebrated part of the life cycle. These alternative perspectives remind us that our relationship with death is largely culturally constructed. The recent pandemic brought the theme of death to the forefront of global discussions in a way we hadn't seen for decades. Suddenly, we were forced to confront our mortality very directly. This resulted in a range of reactions, from panic to a profound reevaluation of priorities and values. A particularly interesting aspect is how the fear of death relates to other fears in our society. The fear of aging, for example, is closely linked to the fear of death. Similarly, anxieties about health, safety, and even professional success can be traced back to this fundamental fear of non-existence. Philosophy and psychology have much to say about how to deal with the fear of death. Existentialist thinkers argue that accepting our mortality is essential to living an authentic and meaningful life. On the other hand, some psychological approaches suggest that a certain level of denial of death can be adaptive, allowing us to function daily without being paralyzed by fear. One interesting perspective is the idea that the fear of death can be transformed into a positive motivational force. Recognizing life's finiteness can inspire us to live more fully, to value our relationships, and to seek meaning in our actions. It is important to understand that the fear of death is not just an individual issue, but also a social phenomenon with significant implications. Public health policies, debates on euthanasia, and even international conflicts are influenced, in part, by how societies and cultures deal with mortality. As we advance technologically, new ethical questions related to death arise. The development of artificial intelligence and the possibility of consciousness uploading raise fascinating questions about what it truly means to die and what constitutes the continuation of existence. Understanding our fear of death does not necessarily mean overcoming it completely. Instead, it involves developing a healthier and more balanced relationship with our mortality. This can lead us to live more authentic lives, to value the present more, and to develop greater empathy for others, recognizing our shared humanity. In the next topic, we will explore how the concept of evil and its manifestations in modern society relate to our fears and anxieties. This discussion will help us better understand how we perceive and react to threats, both real and imagined, in our increasingly complex world. Let's now dive into a topic that often leaves us with a lump in our throats: evil and its manifestations in modern society. It's a subject that might seem grim, but it's essential for us to better understand the world we live in. Imagine for a moment, what comes to mind when you think of evil? Perhaps you visualize movie villains, or maybe tragic historical events. But the truth is, the concept of evil is much more complex and multifaceted than it might initially appear. In our current society, the line between natural disasters and what we call moral failings is becoming increasingly blurred. Consider this: when a natural catastrophe occurs, like an earthquake or a flood, our first reaction is to seek out those to blame. Why didn't the authorities foresee this? Or why weren't the buildings more resilient? Are common questions. It's as if we are constantly searching for a moral explanation for events that, in the past, would simply be seen as acts of God. This shift in perspective is fascinating, isn't it? It reflects how our society has evolved to believe that we have, or should have, control over practically everything. And when that control fails, we seek to assign blame, turning natural disasters into moral issues. But what about evil that is clearly a human creation? Here, we encounter a concept that might sound a bit strange at first: the bureaucratization of evil. It seems complicated, but it's more common than we might think. Think about the major tragedies of modern history. Many were not the work of isolated monsters, but rather the result of efficient bureaucratic systems. It's as if evil has become an administrative process, with people just following orders or doing their job. This depersonalization of evil is something that should keep us alert. After all, when evil becomes a bureaucratic process, it becomes easier for ordinary people to participate in terrible acts without necessarily seeing themselves as evil. And here we reach a crucial point: the banality of evil. This concept, which might sound like an oxymoron, suggests that terrible acts are not always committed by exceptionally cruel people, but often by ordinary individuals in extraordinary circumstances. This leads us to an uncomfortable reflection: under the right circumstances, could any of us be capable of committing acts we consider evil? It's a difficult but necessary question. In the information age, evil takes on new dimensions. Social media, for example, can amplify harmful behaviors. Cyberbullying, the spread of fake news, and the manipulation of masses are all modern manifestations of evil that do not require direct physical confrontation. But it's not all dark. Understanding how evil manifests in our society also allows us to develop strategies to combat it. Education, empathy, and critical thinking are powerful tools in this fight. Additionally, recognizing the complexity of evil helps us avoid dangerous oversimplifications. The world is not simply divided into good and evil. Understanding this makes us more compassionate and less prone to demonize others. An interesting perspective is how different cultures interpret and deal with the concept of evil. What is considered evil in one society can be viewed completely differently in another. This reminds us that our perceptions of evil are largely cultural constructs. As we advance technologically, new ethical dilemmas arise. Artificial intelligence, for instance, raises fascinating questions about moral responsibility. If an algorithm makes a decision that causes harm, who is responsible? Understanding evil in its various forms does not mean being paralyzed by fear or pessimism. On the contrary, this knowledge can empower us. It makes us more aware, more capable of identifying and resisting manifestations of evil in our daily lives. In the next topic, we will explore how we deal with what seems beyond our control, the unmanageable in society. Prepare for a discussion that will challenge our notions of order and chaos in the modern world. Let's now venture into a territory that often feels like we're walking on eggshells: the unmanageable aspects of society. It's like trying to hold water in our hands. No matter how hard we try, it always slips through our fingers. Think for a moment, how many times have you felt completely powerless in the face of events that seemed out of control? Whether it's a global economic crisis, a pandemic, or climate change, our era is marked by challenges that seem to surpass our capacity to manage them. It's like we're on a roller coaster without brakes, isn't it? The pace of change and the scale of the problems we face often leave us dizzy, not knowing where to look or what to do. Take catastrophes as an example. In the past, a natural disaster was seen as something localized, affecting only a specific region. Today, with our globalized and interconnected economy, the impact of a tsunami in Japan can be felt on stock markets across the world. It's as if the butterfly effect has leaped out of science fiction books and into our reality. And what about financial crises? It's fascinating and somewhat frightening to think that decisions made in Wall Street offices can affect the livelihoods of families in small towns far away. It's like we're all tied together by invisible threads, pulled by forces we barely understand. But it's not just the big events that make us feel like we've lost control. On a daily basis, many of us experience a constant sense of always being in a race, always one step behind changes. Technology evolves so rapidly that we barely learn to use one device before another comes along to replace it. It's like trying to hit a moving target, and that target is on a rocket. This sense of helplessness in the face of the unpredictable has profound consequences for our collective psyche. Many respond with chronic anxiety, others with apathy or denial. Some take refuge in conspiracy theories, which offer the illusion that someone, somewhere, is in control, even if it's the villains. But is everything really out of control? Or do we need to rethink what control means in such a complex and interconnected world? An interesting perspective is that we are going through a period of transition. Just as our ancestors had to adapt to city life after millennia of nomadic existence, perhaps we are learning to navigate a world where traditional boundaries, geographical, economic, cultural, are increasingly blurred. This leads us to a crucial question: how can we develop resilience in the face of the seemingly unmanageable? Some societies seem to cope better with uncertainty than others. What can we learn from them? A concept worth exploring is anti-fragility, the idea that some systems not only withstand chaos but actually grow stronger from it. Can we apply this concept to our societies and our personal lives? Another fascinating aspect is how technology, which often seems to amplify our sense of helplessness, can also be a powerful tool for dealing with the unmanageable. Think about how social media can quickly mobilize aid during disasters, or how artificial intelligence is being used to predict and mitigate crises. However, it's important to remember that technology is not a panacea. For every problem it solves, it often creates others. It's like we're constantly running on a treadmill, always moving forward, but never really reaching a final destination. A perspective that is often overlooked is that of traditional or indigenous communities. Many of these cultures have a worldview that more easily accepts unpredictability and change as natural parts of life. What can we learn from these approaches? As we face global challenges like climate change, it becomes increasingly clear that we need new forms of international cooperation. It's like we're all in the same boat, but rowing in different directions. How can we align our efforts? In the end, perhaps the key is not to try to control the uncontrollable, but to develop the flexibility and adaptability needed to navigate turbulent waters. It's like learning to surf rather than trying to stop the waves. In the next topic, we will dive into a subject that often leaves us with our hair standing on end: global terror. Get ready for a discussion that will challenge our perceptions of security and threat in the modern world. Let's now venture into a territory that often makes us feel like we're walking through a minefield: global terror. It's a topic that makes our hearts race and leaves us with that unsettling feeling that danger could be lurking around any corner. Imagine for a moment, how was the perception of global threat before and after pivotal events like September 11th? It's as if the world changed overnight, isn't it? Global terror is like an invisible ghost haunting our collective consciousness. It respects no borders, follows no conventional rules of conflict, and often seems to strike when we least expect it. It's like playing chess against an opponent who changes the rules in the middle of the game. A fascinating and disturbing aspect of global terror is the role of the media in its spread. Consider this: an attack in a remote corner of the world can be broadcast in real time to billions of people. It's as if terror has gained a global megaphone. This leads us to question, to what extent does intensive media coverage inadvertently serve the purposes of terrorists? The digital age has brought a new dimension to this issue. Social media, for example, can be both a tool of alert and solidarity and a channel for spreading panic and misinformation. It's like navigating an ocean of information, where it's not always easy to distinguish between a lifeboat and a shark. But global terror doesn't manifest only in spectacular attacks. It infiltrates our daily lives in more subtle ways. The constant feeling of being watched, increasingly invasive security measures, and the suspicion of the other, all are less visible but equally impactful consequences of the climate of fear. It's interesting to note how the fear of terror can be used as a political tool. Governments around the world have justified controversial measures in the name of national security. It's like we're constantly balancing on a tightrope between freedom and protection. To what extent are we willing to give up our freedoms in exchange for a promise of security? Another intriguing aspect is how global terror affects different societies in distinct ways. While some nations seem to live in a constant state of alert, others maintain an almost surreal appearance of normalcy. It's as if the world is divided between those living in anticipation of the next attack and those who prefer to believe that it could never happen here. Technology, once again, plays an ambiguous role in this scenario. On one hand, advances in surveillance and data analysis promise greater ability to prevent attacks. On the other, these same technologies raise serious questions about privacy and civil liberties. It's like we're building a cage to protect ourselves but risking imprisoning ourselves within it. A crucial point to consider is the root of terrorism. Many argue that global terror is a symptom of deeper inequalities and injustices in the world system. It's like treating only the symptoms of a disease without addressing its underlying causes. How can we create a world where extremism loses its appeal? Community resilience emerges as an important concept in this context. Some societies seem to recover more quickly from terrorist attacks, maintaining a sense of cohesion and normality. What can we learn from these communities? It's fascinating to observe how the fear of terror can shape even our most everyday decisions. From choosing travel destinations to how we behave in public spaces, global terror leaves its mark on surprising aspects of our lives. At the same time, it's important to remember that, statistically, most of us are more likely to be struck by lightning than to fall victim to a terrorist attack. Yet fear doesn't always follow the logic of statistics. Why does global terror frighten us so much, even when more probable threats don't keep us up at night? As we move toward an increasingly interconnected world, perhaps the key to dealing with global terror lies in international cooperation and building bridges between cultures. It's as if we're all in one big web. A movement at one point can be felt throughout the rest. In the next topic, we will explore a dilemma at the heart of many of our discussions about society and politics: the balance between personal security and freedom. Get ready for a reflection that will challenge our notions of individual rights and the common good. Let's now dive into a topic that feels like walking a tightrope: the balance between personal security and freedom. It's a dilemma that puts us before tough choices and makes us question what we truly value as a society. Imagine for a moment, how much of your freedom would you be willing to give up in exchange for more security? It's as if we're constantly negotiating with ourselves and society, seeking the sweet spot between protection and autonomy. The quest for security is like a primitive instinct we've carried since the caveman days. We want to feel protected, safe from threats. But at the same time, we yearn for the freedom to live our lives as we see fit. It's like we're in a perpetual tug of war between these two fundamental desires. In the modern era, this dilemma has gained new dimensions. With technological advancement, we have increasingly sophisticated tools to protect ourselves. Surveillance cameras, facial recognition systems, online data monitoring. It's as if we're building a giant all-seeing eye. But at what cost? Consider social media, for example. We willingly share a vast amount of personal information, often in exchange for convenience or social connection. It's like we're trading bits of our privacy for likes and comments. But where do we draw the line? The debate over security versus freedom becomes even more complex when discussing national security. After traumatic events like terrorist attacks, many societies tend to lean towards security, accepting measures that would be considered overly invasive at other times. It's as if, in the heat of the moment, we're willing to hand over the keys to our house in exchange for a promise of protection. But here's the crucial point: once we relinquish certain freedoms, it's very hard to get them back. It's like trying to put the genie back in the bottle. Governments and institutions rarely relinquish the power that has been granted to them voluntarily. A fascinating aspect of this dilemma is how it manifests differently around the world. Some societies seem more willing to sacrifice individual freedoms for collective security, while others view any state intrusion as an unacceptable threat. It's as if each culture has its own recipe for this delicate balance. Technology, once again, plays an ambiguous role in this equation. On one hand, it offers us powerful tools for protection. On the other, it creates new vulnerabilities and threats to our privacy. It's like we're constantly running to stay ahead of threats we've partially created ourselves. A crucial point to consider is the impact of these choices on social cohesion. When we sacrifice freedoms in the name of security, we risk creating a society of mutual distrust. It's like we're building invisible walls between us, always suspecting the other. At the same time, it's important to recognize that freedom without a minimum of security can be illusory. After all, what value does freedom have if we live in constant fear? It's like having a powerful car but being unable to leave the garage due to fear of theft. An interesting concept to explore is positive freedom versus negative freedom. Negative freedom is the absence of external constraints, while positive freedom is the ability to realize our potential. How does this concept apply to the debate about security and freedom? It's fascinating to observe how our perception of security doesn't always match statistical reality. Often, we feel more insecure in times that are objectively safer than the past. Why does this happen? Could our obsessive pursuit of security be, paradoxically, making us more anxious? Another aspect to consider is how social inequality manifests in this debate. Often, security measures disproportionately affect certain groups in society. It's as if the balance between security and freedom shifts differently depending on who you are and where you stand on the social scale. As we move toward an increasingly digitized future, new challenges arise. Cybersecurity, for example, becomes a growing concern. How do we protect our data and digital identity without creating an Orwellian surveillance state? In the end, perhaps the issue is not to choose between security and freedom but to find creative ways to maximize both. It's like seeking a balanced diet for our society, where neither protection nor autonomy is overly sacrificed. In the next topic, we'll explore how fear becomes a powerful tool in the hands of those who know how to use it, the politics of fear. Get ready for a discussion that will reveal the behind-the-scenes of how our anxieties can be manipulated for political ends. Let's now dive into a topic that often makes us feel like pawns on a grand chessboard, the politics of fear. It's a subject that compels us to look behind the curtains of power and understand how our most basic emotions can be used as tools for political manipulation. Imagine for a moment, how many times have you seen politicians or leaders appeal to the fears of the populace to push their agendas? It's as if fear is a valuable currency in the marketplace of political ideas. The politics of fear is not a new phenomenon, of course. Since time immemorial, leaders have used fear as a tool to unite, or divide, people. But in the age of instant information and social media, this practice has gained new dimensions. It's as if we've handed a megaphone to the peddlers of fear. A fascinating aspect of the politics of fear is how it can turn abstract or distant threats into imminent and personal dangers. Think, for example, of how complex issues like immigration or terrorism are often simplified and presented as direct threats to our everyday security. It's as if we're constantly being invited to see monsters under the bed. But why is fear such a powerful tool in politics? Well, fear has a unique ability to make us act quickly and often irrationally. When we're afraid, we tend to seek simple solutions to complex problems. It's as if our brains switch to survival mode, leaving little room for nuance or critical thinking. An interesting phenomenon is how the politics of fear often feeds on nostalgia. Politicians frequently appeal to an idealized past, supposedly safer and more stable, contrasting it with a present full of threats. It's as if they're selling us a ticket back to a lost paradise that, in reality, never existed. The media plays a crucial role in this scenario. Sensationalist coverage of crimes, disasters, and conflicts can amplify our sense of insecurity. It's as if we're constantly exposed to an apocalyptic newsfeed where good news rarely makes the headlines. Another intriguing aspect is how different fears are prioritized in different historical moments. In one decade, the dominant fear might be communism, in another, terrorism, in yet another, a pandemic. It's as if there's a grim dance of fears, each having its moment in the spotlight. The politics of fear also has a profound impact on how we view the other. Frequently, marginalized or minority groups are portrayed as sources of threat. It's an age-old tactic: unite people against a common enemy, real or imagined. It's as if we're always searching for a scapegoat for our collective problems. A crucial point to consider is how the politics of fear can erode democratic institutions. When fear dominates public discourse, we become more prone to accepting authoritarian measures or relinquishing civil liberties. It's as if, in the heat of the moment, we're willing to trade our democratic voice for promises of security. But it's not all doom and gloom. It's important to recognize that just as fear can be used to manipulate, courage and hope can also be powerful political forces. Think of leaders who have inspired positive change by appealing to our aspirations, not our fears. It's as if they're inviting us to look to the stars, rather than remain paralyzed staring into the abyss. The digital age has brought new challenges and opportunities in this field. On one hand, social media can amplify messages of fear at lightning speed. On the other, they also offer platforms for counter-narratives and fact-checking. It's as if we're in an information arms race, where fear and reason compete for our attention. An interesting concept to explore is moral panic, situations where a condition, episode, person, or group emerges to be defined as a threat to societal values and interests. How are these moral panics created and fueled in the political arena? It's fascinating to observe how the politics of fear can vary between different cultures and political systems. Some societies seem more susceptible to certain types of fear messaging than others. What does this tell us about the values and vulnerabilities of different cultures? In the end, perhaps the most powerful antidote to the politics of fear is education and critical thinking. The more we understand how fear can be used to manipulate us, the more resistant we become to these tactics. It's like developing a mental immune system against political manipulation. In the next topic, we will explore strategies for navigating this sea of uncertainties and fears, how to confront collective fears in an increasingly complex society. Get ready for a discussion that will equip us with tools to become more conscious and resilient citizens. Let's now dive into a topic that acts like a survival kit for the modern world: strategies for facing collective fears. It's like learning to swim in an ocean of uncertainties, finding ways to keep our heads above water amid the waves of anxiety surrounding us. Imagine for a moment, what would our society look like if we could handle our fears in healthier and more constructive ways? It's a vision that might seem utopian, but it's more within our reach than we might think. The first step to confronting collective fears is recognizing them for what they are. Often, our fears are like shadows on the wall. They seem much larger and more terrifying than they really are. It's like turning on the light in a dark room and realizing that terrifying monster was just a pile of clothes on a chair. A powerful strategy is education. The more we understand the world around us, the less threatening it seems. It's like learning to read a map. Suddenly, that dense and scary forest becomes a navigable path. This applies to everything from understanding climate change to comprehending different cultures and religions. Critical thinking is another essential tool in our arsenal against fear. Learning to question narratives, verify sources, and analyze information critically makes us less susceptible to fear-based manipulation. It's like developing an internal lie detector for the news and information we consume daily. Empathy and social connection also play a crucial role. When we genuinely connect with others, especially those different from us, many of our fears based on stereotypes and prejudices begin to dissipate. It's like opening the curtains and letting sunlight into a long-closed room. An interesting concept to explore is community resilience. Some communities seem to handle crises and collective fears better than others. What can we learn from them? It's fascinating to see how solidarity and a shared sense of purpose can be powerful antidotes to paralyzing fear. Media and technology, often seen as fear amplifiers, can also be allies in this struggle. Fact-checking platforms, quality investigative journalism, and responsible use of social media can help combat misinformation and panic. It's like using fire to fight fire. A crucial aspect is learning to cope with uncertainty. In an increasingly complex and unpredictable world, the ability to feel comfortable with the unknown is a valuable skill. It's like learning to surf. Instead of fighting the waves, we learn to move with them. Practices like mindfulness and other stress management techniques can be powerful tools. Learning to observe our fears without being consumed by them can give us a sense of control amid chaos. It's like finding a calm spot in the eye of a storm. Another important aspect is collective action. When we come together to face common challenges, we not only feel less alone but also more powerful. Think of social movements that achieve significant changes despite facing enormous fears and opposition. It's like a herd coming together to face a predator. Together, we are stronger. Art and culture also have an important role to play. They allow us to explore and express our fears in constructive and cathartic ways. A film, a book, or a song can help us process complex emotions and provide new perspectives. It's like using a mirror to see parts of ourselves that we usually can't see. It's fascinating to observe how different cultures deal with fear. Some have specific rituals and practices for confronting collective anxieties. What can we learn from these diverse approaches? It's like having access to a global library of wisdom on dealing with fear. A crucial point is the importance of maintaining hope and optimism. This doesn't mean ignoring real problems, but rather believing in our capacity to face them. It's like planting seeds in difficult times, an act of faith in the future. In the end, perhaps the key to facing our collective fears is remembering our shared humanity. Despite our differences, we all experience fear, hope, joy, and sorrow. Recognizing this can be the first step in building a more empathetic and resilient society. As we conclude our journey through these complex topics, it's important to remember that dealing with fear is an ongoing process. There are no magic solutions, but rather a path of continuous learning and growth. It's like a long journey. Each step brings us closer to our destination, even if the horizon seems distant. In the conclusion, we'll tie all these themes together and reflect on how we can use this knowledge to build a less fearful and more hopeful future. Get ready for a synthesis that will inspire us to be active agents in creating a braver and more compassionate society. We have reached the end of our journey through the maze of modern fears, and what a fascinating trip it has been. In this video, we pay tribute to the brilliant sociologist Zygmunt Bauman and his work Liquid Fear, exploring how fear shapes our contemporary society. We began by unraveling the origins of fear in the modern era, seeing how existential insecurity and globalization amplify our anxieties. We delved into the fear of death, that primordial fear that so profoundly influences our lives. We explored the concept of evil and how it manifests in our society, often in surprising and bureaucratic ways. We faced the challenge of the unmanageable, recognizing how we often feel powerless against forces that seem beyond our control. We discussed global terror and its impact on our collective psyche. We reflected on the delicate balance between personal security and freedom, a dilemma at the heart of many contemporary debates. We analyzed the politics of fear, understanding how our anxieties can be manipulated for political ends. And finally, we explored strategies for confronting our collective fears, seeking ways to build a more resilient and compassionate society. Bauman provided us with a powerful lens through which we can examine our liquid reality. His penetrating analysis helps us better understand not only our fears but also the social structures that feed and perpetuate them. If this video resonated with you, feel free to leave a like. It really helps us reach more people with this important content. And if you want to continue exploring fascinating topics like this, why not subscribe to the channel? That way, you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. Speaking of upcoming videos, we'd love to hear your suggestions. What other books or authors would you like us to cover? Perhaps Civilization and Its Discontents by Freud, or The Courage to Be by Paul Tillich? Leave your ideas in the comments below. Remember, understanding our fears is the first step to overcoming them. As Bauman taught us, we live in liquid times, but that does not mean we are adrift. With knowledge, empathy, and collective courage, we can navigate even the most turbulent waters. Thank you for embarking on this journey with us. See you in the next video.